All right, our next speaker is Daniel Moore with the iRODS Consortium, and he will be talking about the iRODS client library, Python iRODS client 114.
Okay, thanks, Corey. I'm Dan Moore. I'm an applications engineer with the iRODS Consortium, and I'm going to be covering our work, our progress on the Python iRODS client over the past year, which has culminated within the last week in a new release that coincides with the iRODS release of iRODS 4.3.0. And they work together beautifully now, I believe. So to give just a tiny bit of history, this I may refer to this as the Python client or the PRC variously throughout the presentation, just to avoid confusion. This was invented at Cyverse 9 years ago. The principal developer then was Chris LaRose. You can see a lot of his commits in the history. Just like you can probably see a lot of mine in the most recent history right before this release over the past year or 2 years. So we really had charge of this for the last 8 years. So most of that time doing the maintenance and improvements ourselves at the consortium, on the consortium team. The library can be seen over the GitHub website, of course, browsed and downloaded, or it can be installed via pip on your local machine and used to access any iRODS server from your local perspective as a client. So as I said, I've been doing a lot of the last improvements and maintenance, and our executive director, Terrell Russell, and man of many hats, pulls the lever on that process and does the releases and release notes. And mainly we just try to keep a pace of lots of changes that have been happening in the iRODS API itself and in the core code. But it's not just us, it's also the community, and we'd like to also recognize and thank that there have been, thank all the other contributors have been over these 8 or 9 years. So just to begin with, we'll talk about the major improvements or the keeping our features up to date, basically with iRODS itself. Tickets, I'll just briefly introduce that feature. That is a way as a user to grant access to objects that normally only you would be able to, you as an iRODS user would be able to own and access, to view. You can actually generate a new ticket using one of the I commands, for example, and give the string associated with that ticket to other users. And now this change to to Python iRODS client allows that to happen also within the Python client. So in a nutshell, we can use, query, and delete these tickets from the Python client. Secondly, rule execution previously to this year only worked with iRODS rule code, and now with this improvement, we can actually target other rule engine instances, notably Python, the Python rule engine. So we can now say submit a Python rule file for execution by a connected iRODS server. Additionally, we can also see when there is a failure in a rule execution. We can see the hints, the messages coming back in the error stack for why something may have gone wrong in that rule. We also now have added choice of 2 other XML parsers than the original default one. You see the original default is that standard XML at the bottom. We have now also the choice of the secure XML or quasi XML. I'll go over briefly the features of both. These can be selectable. These are selectable either by an environment variable from the outside, or also can be accessed, turned on a per thread basis from within the library. So applications can do that by a call into the PRC. So secure XML is basically the choice of the diffused XML module, which actually renders us less prone to exploits such as the, I think it was called Billion Laughs. It's a rather an old exploit actually, but this is a fix to that. And another example of this was the endless expansion, sometimes exponential expansion of entities, which could be defined in terms of each other. And you could see how that could get out of hand really quickly. So you could really render the XML parser lame pretty quickly. The quasi XML actually allows us to create, use, and importantly, query objects that have particular characters such as backticks and end quotes in them, which we were not previously able to handle. Another new feature is in this path normalization. And this started with just a request, a particular issue to say, don't keep the ending slash on a collection. And that's important when you're querying. The string has to match exactly, right? So this feature is actually embodied in the iRODS path class, which is a subclass of just a normal Python string. But it also has the feature of that you can easily concatenate in a normalized way so that only one slash is added between each path component. And using this, I'll have to say, uniquely Python 3 syntax, we can just easily concatenate this list of path elements together and use it pretty handily as if it were just a string, which it is. And along with those major improvements come a lot of other useful things. We have any iRODS system on which the anonymous user is enabled. We can actually log in as that user from the client without a password. Importantly, we can also use tickets as the anonymous user, and that's important for, for example, sometimes giving web access, general web access to a system where normally permissions are only granted by owner or explicitly by an ichmod command. We also switched to an older PAM API to handle longer password tokens. Additionally, the admin keyword has been added to a couple of iRODS APIs recently. The ticket and the metadata API and the Python client has been changed to reflect that. We can also access the full checksum range of checksum operations as they've recently undergone some change in 4.2.11 and in 4.3.0 towards 4.3.0. Also, when a collection is created, we actually automatically cache a certain number of things such as owner, name, and zone, modify and create timestamps, and whether inheritance is turned on for that collection. Finally, we can also allow a user to change their own password through the client, or we can allow a RODS admin to change the passwords of other users. So for the future, we have a couple of goals that stand out, specific goals that stand out, and parallel, our multi-47 parallel transfer, which basically opens a few threads from the client to its connected server and tries to transfer a data object to or from the server as efficiently as possible across those threads. That could be possibly done better by connecting to several servers at once and distributing those threads, basically cloning the session objects and distributing that better across different internet connections. Also related to the path normalization feature that I discussed, it's possible we could add a current working directory context and a corresponding change directory, change your current collection command and have that all stored within the session. That could be useful for anyone wanting to implement a shell-like feature on top of the PRC. Finally, we recognize that the Python RODS client is a very popular and vital part of development in the iRODS community. And we just want to keep the client current and able to access all the capabilities of iRODS and its present and future incarnations. And with that, I'd like to open up to questions.
All right.
If there are any.
All right. So Dan, you have about maybe 4 minutes left.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody want to ask questions? Yeah.
Hello. It's on behalf of John, my colleague. Is there still a dependency on Python 2 for this?
Oh, I was going to mention that too. I wouldn't class it as a dependency. No, it works on Python 3 as well. And we aim to, we have aimed to keep the Python compatibility up until this release, but I think it's going to be fairly soon that may be dropped.
Okay. Because the current documentation and Ubuntu packages still reference Python 2.
Ah. Okay.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
I think that's a packaging issue.
Yeah.
Likely, I also noticed that, and but all the code is now Python 3 compliant.
Yeah, it was a packaging
Right.
issue. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right, that's true. I
Any
mean,
other questions?
most in the community have been using Python 3, we have noticed. But it is still compatible with Python 2 at the moment.